What happens when one of Britain's biggest comedy legends walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a routine interview, only to find himself at the center of a heated confrontation? Rowan Atkinson, the actor behind the iconic characters Mr. Bean and Blackadder, certainly wasn't expecting the conversation to take such an unexpected turn. What began as a standard television appearance quickly transformed into a tense exchange that caught both the audience and the panel by surprise. The comments that followed have continued to spark discussion among fans ever since. Before diving into the story, remember to subscribe and leave a comment sharing the most unforgettable television confrontation ever seen. Moments like these always get people talking. Seated beneath the bright studio lights on The View, Rowan Atkinson carried the calm, thoughtful presence that has defined his career for decades. Everything pointed toward another enjoyable interview focused on his remarkable body of work, his lasting impact on comedy, and the unforgettable characters that made him famous around the world. At first, the conversation appeared to follow exactly that path. Known for his measured responses and careful approach to interviews, Atkinson seemed completely comfortable discussing his career, his acting process, and the comedy that earned him worldwide recognition. He arrived expecting to speak about his creative journey and the beloved roles that have entertained audiences for generations. What he did not expect was the growing tension that slowly began to build around the table. Then the conversation suddenly shifted. Mr. Bean barely says a word, and when he does, he only really ever speaks through facial expressions and actions. In Blackadder, too, you often react rather than initiate conversation. How comes? Have you just got nothing much to say? An uneasy silence filled the studio. The other hosts exchanged surprised looks as the atmosphere instantly changed. The discussion had clearly taken an unexpected direction. To Atkinson's credit, the veteran actor remained remarkably composed. Although there was the slightest change in his expression, he never appeared rattled. Instead, he stayed calm, collected, and ready to respond as the tension inside the studio continued to grow. "Well, Joy," he replied, his distinctive British accent filling the studio with the same calm, measured tone that has become one of his trademarks.
"There is a great deal of difference between choosing not to speak and having nothing to say. In physical comedy, a single expression or one carefully timed action can often communicate more than 100 lines of dialogue ever could."
His response was thoughtful, composed, and delivered without raising his voice. The answer, however, did little to ease the growing tension. Joy leaned forward once again, still appearing unconvinced. "But isn't that a way of hiding from who you are, though? Aren't you using these characters as a form of defense? When was the last time the public really got to see the man behind the comedic mask?" A noticeable sense of discomfort spread across the studio audience as the atmosphere shifted dramatically. What had started as a friendly daytime interview suddenly felt much more intense. Whoopi Goldberg briefly looked toward Joy, seemingly signaling that the discussion might be going too far, but the conversation continued without slowing down. Atkinson remained composed, although a subtle change in his expression suggested the questions had become increasingly personal. "I find it fascinating," he answered, with the dry wit for which he is well known, "that you consider thoughtful conversation to be synonymous with hiding. Generally speaking, it is often those who speak the most who possess the least behind their words. The characters I portray aren't disguises. They're investigations into the human psyche." He continued, "Mr. Bean, for instance, embodies the universal experience of trying to make sense of a world that often makes no sense." For a brief moment, it appeared the conversation might finally return to calmer territory. "Oh, come on!" Joy interrupted, dismissively waving her hand. "You just wrap it up in pseudo-intellectual fluff. You made a fortune by playing a child because it's easier to deal with that, isn't it? Here in America, comedians speak up about real issues." That remark immediately changed the mood once again. For the first time, Atkinson's familiar, polite smile appeared to fade slightly, revealing the faintest hint of irritation beneath his normally reserved demeanor. The studio fell quiet as the audience waited to hear how he would respond next. After a long pause, Rowan Atkinson looked directly at Joy before delivering a single sentence that immediately changed the atmosphere inside the studio. "I wasn't aware," he said calmly, "that the artistic merit of anything was geographically determined." The remark instantly caught everyone's attention. Without raising his voice, Atkinson continued with the same composed demeanor. "I suspect it is rather easier to condense decades of creative endeavor into reductive labels than to address what in fact those endeavors attempt to communicate." The response was sharp yet controlled, landing with remarkable precision. Rather than easing the tension, however, it seemed to encourage the discussion to become even more confrontational. Joy's expression hardened as she quickly answered. "That's interesting," she replied, "because coming from a man who has built a career on the image of the hapless British fool, that sounds a little rich." She then leaned closer before asking another pointed question. "Tell me, Rowan, how does it feel knowing that your most famous creation is essentially a toddler in a man's body? What example is that supposed to be setting for children?" The question lingered over the table as the studio audience remained silent. The other hosts shifted uneasily, and Sarah Haynes briefly attempted to redirect the conversation toward Atkinson's upcoming projects, but the effort had little effect. Before anyone else could speak, Joy continued. "I'm serious," she insisted. "When a parent puts on Mr. Bean for their children, what are they teaching them? That it's perfectly acceptable to stumble through life making foolish decisions and avoiding responsibility. Is that the legacy you're hoping to leave behind?" The cameras captured a subtle but noticeable change in Atkinson's expression. For the first time during the interview, his relaxed posture became slightly firmer as his hands slowly tightened around the chair's armrests. Even so, his response remained calm and carefully measured. "Joy," he began, his voice steady despite the rising tension, "I'm starting to believe you may not be as familiar with my work as you're letting on. Mr. Bean's appeal has never been about incompetence. It's about ingenuity." The audience waited quietly as the conversation reached another dramatic turning point. "It's about adaptability," Atkinson continued. "He approaches problems differently from others, and despite countless setbacks, he keeps going. Children don't relate to him because he is incapable, but because he sees possibilities where others see none." His explanation was calm, thoughtful, and delivered with complete confidence. Joy responded with a laugh that carried unmistakable skepticism. "The man can't even put on his trousers without turning it into a complete disaster," she said, shaking her head dismissively. "And don't even get me started on Blackadder. Those characters are cynical, bitter, and constantly losing. What is it with British humor and celebrating failure?" By this point, the tension inside the studio had become impossible to ignore. The audience had fallen completely silent, while even the production staff appeared aware that the interview was moving into unexpected territory. What began as a routine promotional appearance had transformed into a passionate discussion about the purpose of comedy and the meaning behind some of television's most recognizable characters. Atkinson paused for a brief moment before carefully choosing his next words. "I think," he began in an even, steady voice, "you're mistaking complexity for negativity." Every sentence was delivered with quiet authority. The tradition of British comedy has always explored the difficulties of life, the way plans unravel, how people stumble, and how everyday situations often become wonderfully absurd. He continued, "The humor comes from recognizing ourselves in those moments. It isn't about celebrating misery. It's about discovering humanity within it." His explanation was measured and thoughtful, offering a clear defense of the creative philosophy behind his work. For a brief moment, It seemed as though the conversation might finally settle. Instead, the disagreement intensified even further. Rather than accepting the explanation, Joy challenged it once again. "Humanity?" she replied. "There's nothing humane about watching a grown man destroy an entire department store because he can't figure out how to put on one pair of trousers. And Blackadder? Those characters are self-serving, vindictive, and sarcastic. Please explain why any of that is funny." At that point, the difference between their perspectives had become unmistakable. The conversation was no longer centered on individual television characters or memorable comedy scenes. Instead, it had evolved into a much broader debate over two completely different views of what comedy should accomplish and why audiences connect with it in the first place. The discussion had shifted beyond criticism of Atkinson's performances and into a challenge of the artistic ideas that shaped his career. Few creators, especially one with decades of acclaimed work behind them, would allow such questions to pass without offering a thoughtful response. The entire studio waited to hear what would come next. Slowly, Atkinson relaxed into his chair. Whatever trace of frustration had appeared only moments earlier faded completely, replaced by a calm expression that was almost impossible to read. He held Joy's gaze for a long moment before finally speaking. His voice remained soft and steady, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades mastering his craft. As he began his response, it became clear that the conversation was entering a completely different stage.
"Joy,"
Atkinson said after a brief pause, his tone measured but noticeably firmer.
"I begin to suspect that this conversation wasn't what you envisioned when you decided to approach me this way. I fear that long before I sat at this table, you had already decided what my characters represent." He leaned forward slightly before continuing. "Here's a thought. When was the last time you created something that truly connected with millions of people around the world?"
The question landed with remarkable force. A sudden silence settled across the studio, and for a brief instant, Joy appeared genuinely caught off guard. That moment passed quickly. "Excuse me," she replied, her voice becoming noticeably sharper. "You really want to challenge what I've done? I've been in this business for 35 years. I've written books, hosted my own show, and spent more time on television than many people in this room have been alive." The atmosphere became even more tense, but Atkinson never lost his composure. A faint smile crossed his face, hinting that another carefully chosen response was coming.
"I'm not talking about how long someone has been around," he answered evenly. "I'm talking about creating. There is a difference between being part of something and contributing something meaningful to it. A longer career does not automatically mean a greater impact."
A wave of uneasiness spread across the panel. The other hosts looked increasingly uncomfortable as the exchange continued. Whoopi Goldberg stepped in once again, attempting to steer the interview back toward safer territory. "I think we should talk about your future plans, Rowan. I hear there's something new coming down the line." By then, however, the discussion had taken on a momentum of its own. Before the subject could change, Joy spoke again. "Oh, now I understand," she said, folding her arms. "This is that classic British attitude, thinking you're better than everyone else, isn't it? You obviously believe you're superior to American television. Smarter, more graceful, better. Well, this time, Mr. Bean is here to hear it." The mention of Mr. Bean immediately changed the mood. Atkinson quietly repeated the name. Mr. Bean. His voice was calm, yet the effect throughout the studio was unmistakable. Conversations stopped. Audience members leaned forward in anticipation. Even the other hosts seemed to sense that something important was about to be said. "You continue referring to that character in a dismissive way," Atkinson said. "Did you know that Mr. Bean has made audiences laugh in more than 200 countries? Very few fictional characters have achieved that level of worldwide recognition and lasting success." Joy responded with a dismissive roll of her eyes. "Oh, come on! Of course it translated beyond language!" And with that, Rowan Atkinson quietly stood up and walked off the stage. Behind him remained a stunned audience, a speechless panel, and a visibly shaken studio after what had begun as an ordinary interview transformed into an unforgettable television moment. Camera operators hurried into position, producers scrambled behind the scenes, and the hosts exchanged uneasy glances as the broadcast came to an unexpected close. Within minutes, the conversation had grown far beyond the walls of the studio. What was supposed to be a routine celebrity appearance had become one of the most talked-about moments on daytime television. Viewers everywhere were left debating not just the exchange itself, but the larger questions about comedy, creativity, and artistic expression that had emerged during the discussion. One thing was certain: the story was no longer about a celebrity interview. It had become a moment people would continue talking about long after the cameras stopped rolling. What did you think of the exchange? Did Rowan Atkinson handle the situation the right way, or should the conversation have unfolded differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories covering unforgettable celebrity moments and television showdowns.